Hello, welcome back everybody to the Energize with Bram podcast. My name is Bram LaGrue. Want to say thank you so much for tuning in with us as always. And today I've invited somebody who I thought stood out in some shape or form, that has a story that I think is compelling and a message and a methodology that she thrives by and helps organizations with, that I believe all of us can learn from, whether we're an individual, a leader, have a team, a business owner, or you're a corporate executive. The same message is one that is relating to all of us, which is one of looking after ourselves so that we can look better after other people. I want to welcome today to the podcast, Sophie Bretag. How are you going?
Hi, Bram. It's so lovely to be part of your podcast and to see you again. Thanks for having me.
That's it. Well, as you alluded to it, our paths somehow came together in an organization where at the time you were working in HR as a senior exec
Yeah.
or a senior manager. That was police health at the time.
Yep.
What have you been doing since, Sophie?
HR consulting and really specializing in workplace wellbeing, but also working with small to medium sized businesses and helping them with their HR needs, because often small to medium sized businesses don't have the financial capability to have a full-time HR person. But with all things legislation and people within organizations, there's often a need for support and help, and having that person that can make sure everything's organized and compliant and the people are safe and well. So I've been doing that. And I've also been prepping for my book to be launched over the last 6 months or so. And it's now out in the world. So I've been focusing on that and family and I guess a work-life balance, which has been great.
We're going to talk about your book, The Kind Way. We're going to talk about that a little bit later. But before we get there, I think one of the things that I've noticed that you talk about a lot is that being kind to oneself, taking time to take the shoes off, walk through the water bare feet, and, take a bit of time to relax and unwind. That obviously is the outcome of something that happened prior. Could you just expand a little bit more what your personal trajectory has been and where you were kind of forced into doing something differently?
So I have always been interested in taking care of others and how best to do that. And I have always taken care of myself in the traditional sense. So always slept well, eaten well, that kind of thing, exercise. But from an emotional perspective, I probably didn't realize until 2024 how important it is to be kind to ourselves first and foremost. And the reason that that became so evident to me is because in early 2024, I was diagnosed with head and neck cancer. I had just started my job with police health, actually. And I was diagnosed with on my tongue. And then I had to have surgery to remove part of my tongue. And I had 30 lymph nodes taken out from underneath my neck and a salivary gland. So it was a really challenging time. I wasn't able to talk properly for quite an extensive period of time. I still have some, I'm going to call it laziness to the side of my tongue because it's still numb and part of my neck is still numb, and we're 2 years down the track. I just celebrated the 2 years cancer-free in May, which is amazing. Yes, I feel really, really lucky. So through that process, I really had to take a look at what was really important to me to make sure that I could heal well enough that I could still be there for my loved ones and that I could still work, because I love working and I didn't want to take too much time off as well. And I had just stepped up into a role covering some leave as well. So I needed to be able to work as well. So through that process, it really showed me where I needed to step back, who were the people that were supporting me and lifting me and taking care of me in a really authentic and real way and caring about me, and what were the things I needed to put in place to make sure that I could heal. Healing, it's only just, apparently nerves take a couple of years to actually reform. So I'm at that peak capacity now of the nerves rejoining. But I wanted to be able to get back to some normality in life. And so self-kindness came into everything that I did through that time. And so it was really, it saved my life, firstly, because I listened to my body intuitively, because there was a lump on my tongue. I went and got it checked. Normally with head and neck cancer, it is something that is quite unusual for my cohort. So it's usually people who are over 60, who are heavy smokers and heavy drinkers. And so my tumor was quite unusual. And so I like to talk about it because I'm an open book, because I think if my journey can help somebody else, then hopefully, someone might not lose their life to head and neck cancer, because it can be quite underlying. And a lot of people don't notice it until there's a lump that comes up in the neck, or there's something, because it can be sort of around the gums, it can be your tongue, and it can be down the throat. So I was just very lucky that I was able to notice it earlier and get it fixed and live my best life. But self-kindness was everything. So
Brilliant. In stark contrast, you sometimes talk about people pushing themselves and achieving and going out and fight and do this and that. And then there's on the other side, the burnout or disease or illness in the middle. What is your perspective on all that? Like, because sometimes people say things happen for a reason, or a gift presents itself often in disguise. Like, I think you're pretty spiritual, so I would imagine you would have the way that you interpret that all.
It was a gift. So I didn't speak to the burnout that happened when I finished in the aged care sector post-COVID. So I had a really, really challenging time working about 7.5 years in aged care. And at the end of COVID, it kind of it did me in. And so I took 6 months off. I was heavily burnt out after that. And I look back at that now, and even though it was really difficult, I took 6 months off to recover. The gift in that, or the reason that occurred, is because it enabled me to start my own consulting firm in wellbeing. I started that during that time. So that was a massive gift, because that's the company I still, a consulting firm that I still run now. It also gave me a really big perspective on how, when we give and overgive to everything around us, but undergive to ourselves, how that can really, really not only physically impact, but mentally and emotionally impact us as well. So that has formed some of the groundwork and some of the work that's now in my book that I've now written. And the gift in cancer, I know that sounds so strange to say that there was a gift in that, but absolutely the main thing for me was, because I talk a lot, I'm a very verbose kind of human. I love to communicate. I love to chit chat, but I had to stop and pause and listen, and not just listen to other people and hold space for them, because I do that in my daily job anyway, but really, really turn inwards and reflect and listen to myself and work out what mattered, what didn't matter, the people that mattered, the experiences I wanted to experience. I think if you talk to anyone who has a life-threatening situation, it sounds really cliche, but your world flashes before you, particularly when you get a diagnosis. And for me, it was, oh my goodness, there's so many things that I haven't done. There's so many people I haven't told how much I love them. I might not see my kids grow up. So all of these things go through your mind when you get that kind of diagnosis. So there is a gift in that, because then it shows you, or it reminds you really, how important and precious life is. And we need to be doing the things that light us up, firstly, with the humans that light us up and love us, and that we love as well. So huge gifts. Not great. Wouldn't recommend going through these things. But, when you look back on things, often the hardest things are the greatest gifts. Yeah.
Look, a turbulent time. I'm sure you would have been on the roller coaster of emotions, especially thinking about, when you think of your kids and spending time with them, and like the realization that we're mortal and then it might come to an end pretty soon. I mean, that's shattering, like big time. I can only empathize with how challenging that must have been for you. But hey, good to see that you came out on the other side, and that, since then, you've been on a spiritual and physical journey to heal and look up to yourself. Tell us a little bit more about The Kind Way, that book of yours that obviously is talking about your framework, the 4 pillars. Tell us a little bit more.
So The Kind Way really was born from seeing and experiencing myself people who overgive and push themselves to beyond what's usually humanly possible to achieve, or to make others happy, or whatever it is that you're trying to do in life. And I really saw a gap in every time I talked about self-kindness or kindness to people. So many people said, I don't know what that means. Is it just being friendly to someone? Is it just talking to people in a lovely way? Is it smiling? Is it doing an act of kindness? Because we hear a lot around random acts of kindness, which are absolutely amazing and absolutely important. But the core of my book, I saw this gap in self-kindness, particularly in leadership, and how I could, with my own experience of applying self-kindness to myself and measuring it myself and tracking it, how I could potentially put that forward to, I'm so sorry, Bram. Someone was trying to call me and I couldn't get rid of them. It hung up.
Okay. If you can just
Sorry.
flip it again.
Yeah, it is. That's weird.
Oh,
there we go.
okay.
Yeah, so I'm so sorry. Will that muck up the recording? Sorry. And then they tried to ring me back because I hung up on them. I'm like, no.
That's okay. So you
Cut that bit out? Yeah.
Self-kindness from
Yeah. So self-kindness for leadership. So I saw this real gap in the way leaders were taking care of themselves, and also seeing leaders who weren't taking care of themselves and the impact that that was having on not only their immediate teams, but also the wider organizations that they were working within. I've seen a lot of leaders in my nearly 2 decades in HR, been one myself, and some of the most challenging things and behaviors that I've seen is around knowing yourself, which is actually the first pillar of my framework, because a lot of people say that they're self-aware, that they're emotionally intelligent, that they understand who they are. And yet when you see them interacting in a workplace or with teams, there can be this disconnect between you're saying you know how you're behaving and you're saying you know how you're impacting the people around you, but are you actually aware of how that is perceived by others? And so there's a really big piece, I think, in leadership that a lot of us have a perception of ourselves that may not be the reality of the way that other people perceive us. And so when we say walk your talk, that's a really big piece of knowing yourself, because if you're not showing up in alignment with your values and who you are in a state of congruence and consistency, then how can your teams possibly thrive? How can you expect your teams to know how you want them to behave and get the work done if you're not showing up in a manner that is conducive to that as well? So that was the foundation of it for me, because getting to know myself better as a human has really changed the way that I live and lead, both in my personal life and in workplaces. I did the Brené Brown Dare to Lead program in 2019, and that really gave me such an insight into quite a few things in the way that I was behaving or how I was showing up or my thought patterns and things that I wasn't aware of. And that really was a wonderful way. It was quite confronting, not gonna lie, because we all have things about ourselves that we don't like. But I think the main part was having curiosity around the parts that maybe weren't so pretty and lovely and the bit that everybody might like, and really looking at myself and saying, if this is how I'm showing up, or if this is the way people might perceive me, if we have a perception of the way that we're showing up and then the way that other people are seeing us, then that's going to be a real challenge in getting the best out of our teams and the best out of ourselves. So my framework has 4 pillars under the acronym of KIND.
Before you go to that, can I just challenge you a little bit and ask you, what specifically was the confronting part for you when you went through that process and you were alerted to things that you weren't aware of?
Yeah, absolutely. As I said, I'm an open book, no problems. I think if I can share my experience and be as open as possible, then I have no problems with sharing that. But probably a couple of things for me. One was around not knowing what my values were, which sounds really strange. But I think a lot of people think that they know what's important to them. But when they actually put a label to what that value or what they value, it can be quite confronting. So at the time, we were looking at our values in the Brené Brown program, and I'd never, ever looked or thought about it before. And one of the things I had as my top few values in my top 5 were travel and success. And my family value wasn't as high. And I had a really hard time because I had younger children at that time. I had a really hard time thinking, how can I possibly be putting my work before my children? Because I love my children, but I also really, really want to succeed, and I want a successful career, and I want to create impact. And I think when we're faced in the black and white around being really honest with ourselves about what matters, why it matters, and are we okay with how it feels for that to matter? And so I had to work through, and my values didn't change because I thought I should have them a particular way. What I had to do was work my way through knowing that I value things, but at the moment in my life, I'm really, really valuing my career and I really want to do travel. But how do I bring my family, who are important to me, along on that journey as well? So there was that piece. There was also another piece around the way in which I communicate. So I am a very direct communicator. I can be quite blunt at times. And I had to really take a step back, I think. And, I can put sugar on top when I need to. But if I'm under pressure, I'm certainly a very direct communicator. I don't like fluffy conversations. I don't like people to just waffle on. I just want people to tell me what you want me to do, how you want me to do it, and then let me go do it. And I think that can be quite abrasive to some people who don't have that communication style. So that was a really big piece for me to learn around reading the room and then being self-aware enough to put a little bit more softness to my words and my directives when I was communicating.
Yeah. This is where DISC is, again, such a wonderful tool. We spoke about it
100%.
before we started, right? So
Yes.
your
Yeah.
G sometimes
Right.
then gets really very dominant,
Yes.
direct and abrasive potentially, or for some, that's
Yep.
just an interpretation. It's not a fact. It's just a direct style.
Yeah.
How has that whole piece of DISC helped you as a leader and as an HR professional?
I think that I've done DISC now 3 times in different stages of my career. And at certain times, I've come out a little bit stronger in certain parts, just depending on what's happening in my life and my career at that time. But for me, it's a core part of knowing yourself, isn't it? Because if you can know yourself from the way in which your makeup is made up, then it gives you the capability to then become more adaptable, more empathetic, more understanding, more influential, I think, in the way in which you can communicate with people, but also the way in which you can understand others. So when you know yourself, you can lead from a place of knowing how you can then interact with others and put your best foot forward. I'm 100% love DISC. I absolutely love it. I think it's a great tool.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I certainly, like you, really love it. I think there's a lot of value in good methodology, and there's multiple out there, but that's definitely one of them. So your style is high I, high D, right? So depending on, they might see the really frivolous, flamboyant, energizing, bubbly I, or they might see the very, hey, let's get done.
Children often see that one.
Don't fluff around. Time is money, sort of thing.
Yeah.
Having said that, I'm wondering, you now said like, hey, there's these 4 pillars and it starts with self-awareness. So whether it's Brené Brown's process or DISC or any other tool that helps one to become more self-aware, what are then the 3 next pillars of your framework?
So the second one is I, so include with intention. Something that I've seen in my HR work is obviously we focus on the humans within the workplace, and our world is so hyper-connected. We are so aware of other people's cultural backgrounds, and the world is a melting pot. Like, it's a beautiful, amazing place to be. But with that can come some challenges around cultural backgrounds, trauma impact in people's lives, workplace situations that people might have found themselves in, when they move to a new workplace, they might have moved out of a not so great workplace. Communication styles is another one, awareness around including people in conversation. I think that often we talk about inclusion sometimes just from a cultural perspective, but I think that there are so many facets to being inclusive and how we can really truly see the human in front of us. And by knowing ourselves, it gives us the space to then hold space for others and get to know them and include them in a really meaningful and beautiful way. So this is where belonging and mattering come in within a workplace. Say, for instance, if you're in a meeting, having a chat with your team, having a think about it as a leader, if you're the person leading the meeting, who are the people that always talk? Who are the people that don't always talk? And are those people that don't get the chance to talk or don't feel confident enough to talk or are just, the deep thinkers, how are we being inclusive for them? So are we giving them the space to actually put their innovative ideas forward? Are we giving them the space to actually look back and have a conversation around their thoughts on a particular topic or a project or whatever they're working on? And I think so often, particularly I know with and this has been a benefit for me, but knowing the way that I communicate is allowing the quiet leaders the space to step up and put their ideas forward as well. because I know that a lot of quiet people are often the most beautiful, deep thinkers, and they come up with things that are often quite different to the people like me who just kind of go bleh with my thoughts. Like what comes into my mind comes out. So inclusion for me under this pillar is a lot more than just your cultural background. It's how do we create a space where the person in front of us feels that they're seen, that they matter, and that they belong in whatever space they're working within. So yeah.
Those, just to interpret it back from this perspective, those slower, methodical, thoughtful people are typically the C's,
C's,
and
yeah.
sometimes S's as well, right? So the
Yeah.
slower paced people
Yeah.
that not necessarily feel comfortable in opening up in a large group, and where they like to just either rather have a one-on-one conversation or even like share stuff anonymously or through email. So yeah, I like how you're mindful of that, because when I find the interesting thing is, and this is the work that we sometimes also did together at Police Health, is that when you do a town hall meeting, there's a lot of people. And then somebody says, blurb, this is what I think that we should do. But then some people, they just feel intimidated just to speak up. Like public speaking is really a fearful thing for many people. So for them then to come out of their shell, they don't do it. The I's and D's do, but the S's and C's don't. So we've got to find other ways to include them as well as part of the process.
Yeah.
I'm glad that you're on top of that.
Yeah, thank you.
I would have expected. Tell us more about the other sides of the pillars. So we got so far now your self-awareness, then the inclusion. What else?
And then N is in the KIND acronym, stands for nurture your capacity. So I think that this is a piece around, we look at capacity when we're in a workplace often around the amount of work that we can get done within a particular period of time. But I love that we're on an energized cast discussion, because it's really about how we can build, retain, and sustain our energy as leaders. So what are the things in our daily life that we can bring in that make us feel energized, lighter, happier, more connected, less stressed, and just living our best lives? Because when we are, such a cliche, pouring from an empty cup, but when we are depleted energetically or emotionally or even mentally, that can really show up in the way in which we show up in the team and lead our teams, but also with our family members in our daily lives. So nurturing your capacity could be anything from making sure you're well hydrated to having fresh air in the workplace, being able to open windows up, to having plants in the workplace or on your desk, barefoot walking through water or walking on the beach or walking on grass, getting out in nature, all the things that we look at as a well-being or wellness thing to implement in our life. I think it will be different for every person, and it is different, but it's the combination of things that make you feel genuinely able to hold space for others and to enjoy your life and feel good.
Yeah, there's this beautiful analogy, which you as a mother would also relate to, I imagine, is that when you sit on a plane and there's an emergency happening and all the masks, the oxygen masks drop, you first put it on you, because how can you as a mother, as a parent, as a leader, as an advisor, how can you really look after others if you haven't looked after yourself? So whatever helps you to get the oxygen, give it to yourself, right? Like
Exactly.
It's very easy to keep giving
Yeah.
at the expense of ourselves. I think it's a good idea for us to have a little chat about, is it possible that one of the genders might find themselves more so in that space of giving more at their own expense?
I think that predominantly and traditionally women who, I think it's becoming a lot different now because we have a lot of stay-at-home dads and partners who are supporting us. My husband is absolutely amazing. He does all the cooking. He does all of the washing, folding. I do all the other bits and pieces in the house. He'll do stuff outside. We're a real team. And I think that traditionally it's been seen as the female job or place to take care of the children, make sure the household's happy. And that is very much changing these days. I mean, I work a lot differently to my husband. We certainly work very well as a team. So I think, yes, to answer that question, yes, I think probably traditionally women do tend to carry a lot of the mental load. I certainly carry a lot of the mental load when it comes to, school pickups and all the extracurricular activities and doctor's appointments and vet visits for the dog and that kind of thing. But I would like to think that hopefully men are starting to take care of themselves well as well now, because there is such a prevalence of mental ill health in young men and men. And I think that that comes from a expectation, whether it's a societal expectation or something they're putting on themselves, or whether it's cultural, that they need to be the provider and show up and push through. And I think that, when we speak about our people, when we speak about men or women not nurturing themselves, I think we women and men are so different that we have different problems and expectations, and they impact us differently. And I think that, hopefully we're just working our way through that and working out that, people need to support themselves as a human first and foremost.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
100%. And like you said earlier, different people need different things. So one might say walking bare feet through the water or in a forest might be really connecting to the earth and kind of channeling their energy and making them feel more relaxed and peaceful. That might be one. But for other people, it's something completely different. So it might be punching a boxing ball.
Right.
It's about, again, back to self-awareness. What do I really like to feed me and nurture me, look after me?
Absolutely. And I think that there is this perception that we need to be doing a particular thing to make ourselves well or to be well. It's almost putting an extra expectation on ourselves that, oh, well, if I don't like going to the gym, maybe I'm not taking care of myself well enough. But what is it that I like to do? I think so often as we grow up, we lose sight of that curiosity around, I feel like doing this today, I'm going to do this. Or I feel like eating this today, I'm going to do this. And then we get onto social media and go, oh, no, that's bad for us. Oh, no, we should be doing this, or we should be doing. And I think that word should impacts us all quite heavily in the way in which we show up in our lives and in workplaces.
Well, should always indicates an expectation of something or someone else that we see as the standard. Often taking back what we think is really important. So
there's a power in it.
Clash.
There's a power in that, though. And I think if you get that know yourself part right, you will start to intuitively tap into the things that feel good, because you'll give yourself that reflection time to actually go, oh, hey, that felt really good, or I really enjoyed that. Maybe I need to incorporate a little bit more of that into my life. And so, it's that piece again, isn't it, of being really in touch and connected to yourself, so you know what you can do more of and be more of and have more of.
So true. I'm curious, Sophie. As a high I, you would appreciate differences.
Yes.
But we also know that, especially in the workplace, we can easily judge differences because we don't understand it. We don't appreciate it. I call it the head and heart thing. You don't understand in your head why people would do it that way or why they wouldn't do it that way. And then you start judging it in your heart, which means your heart closes, and then you basically call it a label. And therefore, it's a disconnect. People don't get along. They don't work well together. You don't get the best of yourself or the other. What's your perspective on differences? Like, how do you think great leaders versus not so great leaders, how do they deal with differences, whether culturally speaking, behaviorally speaking, value-wise, and so on?
I'm thinking of one great leader in particular that I've worked for, and they were wonderfully adept at being curious before judging. So holding space in a place of curiosity before they jumped into assessing the person in front of them. They were also really good at being humble. So answering a question with, I don't know the answer to that. How about we work that out together? Or could you give me your ideas? Because I'd really like a different perspective on what you're thinking that might solve this problem. So they're two things that I've found are really, really important, because then that gives the person in front of them the understanding that they're seen and that they matter and that they are important in the workplace. And that then helps to bring buy-in when you're trying to bring in changes or bring a team to work together on particular projects. I feel that great leaders tend to be very agile as well. So They are more easily adaptive. When challenges arise, they can bend and flex the way that they need to show up to be able to get the best out of the people in front of them. Instead of having that rigidity in, this is me, this is who I am, this is how I show up, and this is my expectation, so now go and get it done. That's never going to get you as far as saying, I really respect what you bring to the table. I understand we might work differently, but what can we do to work together to make this actually happen as a team rather than my way or the highway? Sometimes people think that the best leaders are the people who are friends with everybody in their team or friends with everyone in the organization. And I don't think that's true. I think respect before friendship is often a more successful and impactful and influential leader, because if you respect, like, think about someone in your life, if you respect them, you may not genuinely think that you'd be friends outside the workplace, but there are a lot of people in workplaces that I've gone, wow, you're really interesting. You know a lot of things, and I might not like you too much as a human because we're very different, but that doesn't mean that I don't respect you and that I won't work really professionally and in a really good way because you bring something really interesting to the table. So, yeah, so I think that there's a few facets to being a really good leader and getting the best out of people. Yeah.
Beautiful. I love how you started with curiosity. Good leaders lead with curiosity rather than assuming that they know.
Yeah.
So be open to hearing somebody, like tuning in with someone starts with asking questions rather than statements. I like that. The second one was being humble, right? Great. Third one was respect. And I like how you said that respect doesn't need to mean that you need to be friends. So therefore it's about a professional finding something that you appreciate in someone.
Yep.
That makes you respect them. And therefore that builds connection, because it's very easy if judgment gets in the way that any goodwill kind of goes out of the window at the same time, right? So just find something. I always say there's 4 things you can do. You can like, admire, trust, respect, or what was the one? Like, admire, respect. And there's another one, a fourth one. And really, if you just find something, just find something. So you look up to something, like you said, hey, I really like how they always dress so so suavely. Like,
Yeah.
I like. If you say, hey, I really like how they interact with people and how they explain themselves so eloquently. That's the thing. Hey, I really look up to how well they're doing things with numbers and how they make numbers come alive in a story. Whether you like, admire, respect, or anything else, you just find something positive.
Yeah.
It helps you to build that communality and builds a connection rather than a disconnect.
Yeah.
I got a feeling that the leader that you were talking about is somebody I actually also know. Is that possible?
No, not the one you're thinking of. No, it was a different one.
Anything else from your book, The 4 Pillars?
Yeah. So the D in kind is demonstrate conscious leadership. So it's really stepping into what we were really just talking about then, is really being self-aware enough to be curious enough to then have the capacity in yourself to give better to the world around you. And so it's about what we put the first 3 pillars in place in the way in which we show up in our life and in leadership. So being that conscious leader.
Beautiful. Love it. So KIND is really an acronym. Can you just summarize it again quickly?
Yeah. So K is know yourself. I is include with intention. N is nurture your capacity. And D is demonstrate conscious leadership.
Sweet. I like it. I want to come back on something else that I've noticed that you're really big on. And I have to say, I'm a bit conflicted about the notion. This is interesting. So as you know, I'm a psychologist by trade. I've never practiced, but I got the degree.
Yeah.
Anytime when people say positive psychology, in a way, it presses a hot button of mine a little bit. But could you explain objectively what it is?
So it's around being able to see, instead of mental ill health or instead of finding the deficit in things, it's about how we can have things in our life and structures and processes and modalities that can bring out the positivity in our life. So it is still around the human psyche. It is still around having conversations and discussions and treatments for people, but they're probably less traditional. So things like gratitude and kindness and your well-being and really looking at how you can boost the positivity in your life rather than finding the deficit or the ill health in people.
Gotcha. Because, yeah, obviously, if people think of clinical psychology, it's all about mental illness and challenges and problems and weirdos, and that's it.
Almost like treating the illness or treating the deficit or the thing that's missing whereas what I love about positive psychology is it puts us into a mindset, firstly, of what are the things that are really good for us and what are the things that are amazing for our happiness and our well-being, and what is it that we can do more of instead of treating a gap.
Yeah, try to fix it up, patch it up. And here's an interesting one. Have you ever considered, hand to heart, that positive psychology is originally conceptualized by high eyes?
No, I had never thought about that, but probably that is a really interesting thought. Potentially, because you have that inbuilt innate optimism in you as an I. And so it would be interesting to see whether a lot more people who are I's are drawn to positive psychology over traditional psychology, and whether someone who is potentially a C or an S who's more detail oriented and very much about rigor and structure and certain practices, whether they would find it too airy-fairy and they would need the more traditional psychology. So yeah, interesting.
100%. Here's the thing. We all have cognitive biases. And if you have, let's say, if you take a model like DISC, which is a behavioral style model and communication model and the likes, it really shows and reveals the cognitive biases that we all have in some shape or form. Like example, if you think of anytime when you and I sign a legal agreement that obviously has been drafted by lawyers before AI is probably doing it for us, right? But let's just say that there's a thing in there that says the cool-off period clause, right? That after you sign something of significant value, that you have X amount of days to change your mind without any payback or penalties. Well, who do you think they ever created that clause for?
Well, probably the people who are the C's and the S. Well, really the S is probably so, yeah. And conscientious C. Yeah, C, because they're data-driven. Data-driven, yeah.
We all come in from a certain perspective that we then kind of assume that everybody else shares with us. But some people, they don't care, in your case, they don't care about the positive, optimistic world perspective as much as you go with more skepticism and, hey, I want to cover my ass and make sure that I can get out. And if I change my mind, if I get new information that shows me that it's not the right, smart way to go forward.
Sorry, just on that, do you think that when we're looking at within a workplace and we're thinking about teams working well together, and if we're talking about DISC personality, you know how there's the adaptive style? It would be very interesting to see if there is a way to shift that cognitive bias within a workplace if they are more exposed to some of a different, so like, energy is contagious. So say, for instance, you've got a really optimistic person in a workplace working with a really not so positive person in the workplace. There is the potential for either the positive person to become less positive if they're exposed to more of the negativity, and vice versa. So it'd be very interesting to see if someone was a really high C and they were of the more negative mindset, whether exposing them regularly, but exposing them to more positivity, which is where my work comes in and where my mindset comes in, is how you show up has a ripple effect. So it would be interesting in a workplace to actually see whether if you put some really, really positive people in, whether it would rub the people up the wrong way who weren't very positive and it would become more uncomfortable, or vice versa, or whether you could positively shift a mindset to become a more positive cultural experience. Anyway, I'm just putting it out there as a question.
Interesting question and kind of an idea to kind of play around with. I don't know the exact answer to it either, but one thing that I definitely have come to terms with is that, like energy, like if you think about batteries, you got the positive and the negative, and you need both of them to actually generate the energy. I think of DISC very similarly, is that the extremes need one another. And I firmly believe that in English, we have this beautiful saying. I don't have it in my language, which is Dutch, but here in English, we say our other half in our private life. And very often, if you check out the disc, people of different kinds find each other in a loving relationship at home.
Mhm. Yeah.
Right? Your husband is probably
Yeah.
your
Often, yeah, we are. We're polar opposites.
So then the idea now is, though, as soon as you go into a work environment, what I notice is that the differences, the opposites, initially repel,
Mm.
which is the opposite of what we just said about a loving relationship. But here's the point. I firmly believe these days that the differences are here to educate us and teach us and own up to the differences so that we can find balance in the middle.
Mm.
So back to your question. Those high C people that are very skeptical, analytical, detail driven, and so on. And then you got this really optimistic, flamboyant, energizing,
Kind of annoying.
influence you type of person.
Yeah.
Right? Let me try to make you see the light, right? Like, let's get you out of your negativity, get you more.
I can help you.
This is what we tend to try to do. But here's the point. I think if we just go in with coming back to your point earlier, let's be curious.
Yeah.
You know, I'm self-aware enough to know that I'm really negative. Tell me, why are you always so positive, Sophie?
Mm.
Why do you think positive psychology can help me?
Yeah.
If we start with that curiosity, guess what? We're already miles ahead. When we start seeing that, hey, rather than me judging you for being different, let me just try to understand and appreciate why you are like that and how that potentially could add value to me.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that fits in firmly under the include with intention part, because if we are curious enough to understand the people who are around us, then we will get far more traction in getting stuff done if the other person feels like they're understood. Because some of the biggest conflict come from communication breakdown, where one person's saying something, another person's saying the other thing. They're meeting in the middle, but they're doing because they both think that they're right. And I think if you can come at those conversations with curiosity, and there's a vulnerability with that as well, because it's saying, hey, I don't have all the answers. I may not be right. And we work out the best way forward from here. And I think that, I mean, obviously there's emotion and that kind of thing that comes in with, uncomfortable conversations. But yeah, I think that the main thing that we can do is start with curiosity. I think that's super important. Yeah.
And if people don't go there, Sophie, what else gets in the way? What stuff gets in the way of that?
Oh, ego. I think when we've all seen, when a leader, and I'm talking about, even leaders when they come together and they're having a robust conversation, I think, there's a certain amount of ego that's often involved with that. People who sit on boards, often some of the boards that I've worked with, they've been people who are experts in their field. But just because you're an expert doesn't mean you know everything, and you may not have thought of something from another person's perspective. And so I think that ego definitely is something that gets in the way. I think there's a fear of being vulnerable and potentially not being right and not having all the answers. And so sometimes people go straight to the telling or the problem solving from their perspective instead of sitting back and going, hey, look, I may not be right. So tell me, I may not be right as well. So let's have a chat about that. So I think there's a vulnerability in that as well. And I think that there's also a part in it, how you've been brought up, your experiences in the world and in workplaces. The human psyche is such a complex, I'm not going to say machine because it's not a machine, but a complex ecosystem of all the things that we've experienced, all the people we've been around, all the adventures we've been on, all the traumas that we have been exposed to or navigated will change us in particular ways and create the human that we see in front of us. And so often if they're in a situation, or if we're in a situation we don't feel like we're understood, then the triggers around that and the emotional dysregulation that can come from that can really impact on interpersonal relationships for sure.
Yeah. Hey, I'm mindful of time here.
Yeah, we can chat for ages.
We're coming to the end of the podcast, but one thing I know is that you wanted to touch base on something specifically, which was around if there is a correlation between certain styles versus certain mental illnesses and the like. So that was basically what you wanted to talk about.
I think the reason I wanted to talk about maybe more so in the risk factors that might be attributed to particular disc styles. So say, for instance, with the D, me being a DI, so being dominant and being someone who likes to get stuff done, works at a really fast pace. Potentially, I might not be great. I am now, but that's a learned behavior. Taking breaks, slowing down, taking some deep breaths. I guess from an I perspective, there could be an overgiving or a giving out too much energy. There could be a lacking details and just fluffing over a situation when actually it probably needed a little bit more thought. When you think about a CS, rumination, I know my husband, he's a CS, so ruminating quietly and then things fester. So I guess for me, it was just an interesting sort of topic that I threw out to you before we recorded the podcast, but it was more around, from a DISC perspective, do you think that certain personality styles or certain parts of the DISC group have different types of predispositions or are at risk of particular things that will impact their well-being and their mental health?
It's a great question. And I remember one of your peers, Nicole, was the first one who actually raised that question to me a few years ago, which meant then I went on for searching for an answer, because once you have the question, you want to be able to answer it.
Yeah.
It's interesting. It's not just an opinion of mine. I found a piece of scientific research performed by a gentleman called Peter Agnew, where in 2021, he published a paper called "Is There a Positive Association Between a Leader's Disc Style and DSM-5 Personality Disorders?" And then continues, "A comparison with the interpersonal circumplex model, Australian College of Applied Psychology." What I found in there was very interesting. You spoke earlier about the high C, very analytical people. It's known that the legal fraternity and accountants and engineers, like some of these professions that are high C driven, have some of the highest depression, anxiety, and suicide rates across a whole number of different roles. And so this paper documented that anxiety and depression correlates highly with C. Now, I got to make sure that I quote this the correct way, which means it doesn't mean that everybody who's a high C will have that. No, it means if there is an Achilles heel, if people are under stress too long, if they are being burned out, the default mechanism that they will lapse into could be anxiety or depression. That's what it means.
Yeah.
So your self-awareness arms you against that, right? It helps you to put the right practices in place to not become depressed or anxious and develop a whole like DSM style disorder around it. On the flip side, which is the one that you probably will appreciate hearing about, is I being extroverted, flamboyant, energizing, sometimes loud, not detail-oriented, very big picture, fast-paced, and a lot, and not patient, right?
Yes. No, I know nothing about that, Bram. What?
Yeah, that correlates highly with what they call the histrionic disorder, which means one that constantly needs a spotlight on it, or a pat on the back, or likes on Facebook.
So the dopamine hit. They want the dopamine hit.
Exactly. It's like, hey, high five me. Tell me how great I am. Tell it in public. That sort of thing. Right next to them is then the other people person, which is the high S, which your husband apparently is the nice guy, the family man, right?
Yeah.
Like the easygoing guy who likes his butt in the garden and get around with and go for a nice walk. High S, which is all about safety and security and community, right? They often, this is the risk that they have. And again, it shows everybody has strengths and weakness. We all are at risk of something, and it's different. Yeah. But high S's, what do you think it would be? From a disorder?
I think my husband's definitely a very giving person, very caring, quietly gets on with things. So probably at burnout, because just keeps on give without giving much back to himself. I'm not really sure. Maybe anxiety, because they sort of worry about things. But I think everybody has that predisposition to being anxious about things. This is part of a natural makeup with fight or flight. But yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure.
Well, drum roll, please.
Diddle-diddle-diddle.
It is actually for S's, you know, how we have the saying, let's try to keep the,
Keep
I don't
it.
want to step on
Mm.
anybody's toes. I don't want to hurt anybody's feeble, which is
Mm.
typical S things to do, which means they swallow it
Yeah.
to keep the peace.
Yeah.
They hold grudges over time. The
Mm.
bucket is filling up and quietly is just filling up and you don't really see it, but sooner or later, something hits the fan. And
Yeah.
that is basically what they call on the DSM, dependency disorder,
Thing.
where basically they're just taking things at their own expense, which then leads to burnout, and where they don't
it's
necessarily voice themselves.
like a form of martyrdom as well. Like I feel like sometimes that could lead to resentment in that person as well, because they sort of swallow, and then don't speak up what helps them or will make things easier or give their opinions, and then can get resentful that people don't really understand them. Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
Which then becomes passive aggressiveness in
Yeah.
for example, in the workplace or something
Yeah.
like it, or just
Mhm.
like keep feeling that they're swallowing it and they keep it on
Mm.
their own chest.
Mm.
Now, on the flip side of then the last ones would be the D's. And it's, again, we got to say again, it doesn't mean that every D person is
No.
low emotionally intelligent and therefore turns into a disorder. But that's
Mm.
where antisocial behavior, that really blunt, direct, I don't care about you, it's all about me sort of behavior,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
the disorder that high D correlate highly with.
So a lack of empathy.
Yep, exactly. Which is what you said, like, hey, people should really learn to become more empathetic as a leader. Well, that's exactly undoing a
There is that
potential
thing.
trend of becoming a D bully.
It's such an interesting discussion. That's why it was just something I intuitively thought of before we got on the call. And I thought that it's such an interesting discussion to have, because even when we think about all of those risk factors and all the potential predispositions, if we look at the core pillars around what I speak of and what other people do with their work as well, when it's in the emotional literacy or whether it's to do with wellbeing, anything like that, is if we can if we can know ourselves and take care of ourselves the best possible way, then we are at less risk of those kinds of things expressing themselves within our lives. So I think it's such a lovely full circle discussion moment at the end of it.
Yeah, I personally love it as well. And great that we can unpack this, because I don't necessarily go there often. But hey, we got there. It's great. If there's any final words that you would like to give to the ones that are actually aspiring leaders, what's the best piece of advice that you can give them from your own journey and all the work you've been doing with organizations and leaders out there?
Find yourself a mentor. Find yourself someone, whether that's a coach, whether it's a formal, informal mentor within the workplace, outside the workplace, someone you admire, someone who's walked the journey before you and you want that support. I think for me, some of the most impactful things have been able to be generated in my life and my career after I have had somebody in my sphere of influence who has been able to lift me when I am struggling, who has been a sounding board for when things have been difficult, and who has believed in me before I believed in myself.
Those are such inspiring and heartwarming words there. So I really appreciate that, Sophie. Hey, pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on this podcast. And obviously, you're living the kind way, clearly.
I absolutely am. If I wasn't living in it, I certainly couldn't write about it and put it out. It would be too disingenuous. So it's been so lovely chatting to you, Bram, and going a little bit deeper on some of the more difficult topics.
Thank you so much from the heart. Well, everybody, I hope you enjoyed this episode here on the Energize with Bram podcast. Be kind to yourself, look after yourself, as Sophie would recommend, and I look forward to seeing you again in the next episode. Bye-bye.